The closet mirror reflected a woman Rebecca barely recognized. At 36, a financial consultant to some of Los Angeles's most powerful names, she observed the dark circles under her eyes as she adjusted the pearl necklace her grandmother had left her. The apartment in Century City was too quiet for a Friday night. Matthew had said he had late meetings with potential investors. Again, the third time that week. Rebecca picked up her phone and opened Instagram without really wanting to. It was a masochistic habit she had developed in recent weeks, this compulsion to look for signs of what her instinct already knew. Her fingers scrolled through the timeline until they stopped abruptly. Her heart sank. The photo was recent, posted just 15 minutes ago. Ashley Morrison, the 24-year-old marketing assistant Matthew had hired 6 months prior, posed in a sapphire blue Versace gown that Rebecca recognized immediately. Not because she had seen it before, but because she knew every curve of that neckline, every detail of the Swarovski crystal embroidery. She had spent 20 minutes admiring that same dress at the Rodeo Drive boutique 3 weeks ago, before deciding that almost $12,000 was excessive, even for the Harrison Grand Estate Charity Gala. The photo's caption read, "Ready for Beverly Hills' most glamorous night, Saturday. Harrison Gala, Chachu Versace gown." The location was tagged, Harrison Grand Estate, Bel Air. Rebecca felt her blood run cold. The Harrison Grand Estate Charity Gala was Beverly Hills' most exclusive event, with tickets costing $50,000 a pair. Richard Harrison, a real estate mogul and one of California's wealthiest men, opened his mansion once a year for a night of absolute luxury where Los Angeles' elite gathered. And Matthew was there, with her. Rebecca zoomed in on the photo. The dress fell perfectly on Ashley's slender body, her blonde hair cascading over her tanned shoulders. She held a champagne flute and smiled with that youthful arrogance of someone who believes they're conquering the world. In the comments, friends filled the post with fire emojis and exclamations about how stunning she looked. Rebecca's hands trembled. She scrolled down and found more photos. Ashley at the mansion's entrance, next to a silver Maserati. Ashley in the main ballroom, with baccarat crystal chandeliers in the background. And then, the image that definitively shattered Rebecca's heart. Ashley and Matthew. He in a Tom Ford tuxedo, she radiant in that incredibly expensive gown. Both captured in a photo obviously taken by someone else, perhaps a social photographer from the event. "Perfect night with special people," read the caption. Rebecca let the phone drop onto the sofa. 7 years of marriage. 7 years building a life together while she built her career from the ground up, transforming herself from a junior analyst into one of the most respected financial consultants on the West Coast. Matthew had always been charming, ambitious, with that easy smile that convinced investors and won clients for his real estate investment firm. But in recent months, something had changed. The late-night meetings multiplied. Business trips extended. And Ashley, the young blonde with a freshly acquired marketing degree, became a constant presence in his conversations. Rebecca picked up the phone again and called Diane, her assistant and confidant for 5 years. "Rebecca, is everything all right? It's almost 10 at night," Diane answered with concern in her voice. "Diane, I need an urgent favor. Can you check my company's corporate credit card statements, specifically transactions from the last 4 weeks?" There was a pause. Diane knew Rebecca well enough to understand that this was no casual request. "I'll access them now. Give me 5 minutes." Rebecca walked to the panoramic window overlooking the lights of Los Angeles. Matthew had access to her corporate credit card. It was a convenience she had offered 2 years ago, when he needed to close an urgent deal and had no limit left on his own card. She trusted him, or had trusted him. The phone rang. Rebecca. Diane's voice was tense. There's a transaction for $12,340 at Versace on Rodeo Drive, 3 weeks ago. And what's more, $50,000 to Harrison Events Limited, 2 months ago. Plus, there are dinners at Nobu, Spago, Mastro's, all high-value transactions, always for 2 people. Rebecca closed her eyes. The dress, the gala tickets, all with her money, with the card from the company she had built with sweat and sleepless nights. Thanks, Diane. Can you do me one more favor? Call Richard Harrison and confirm if that invitation he extended to me 2 months ago is still valid. Another silence. The invitation to tonight's charity gala? Exactly that one. Rebecca, it's 10 o'clock. The event started at 8. I know, but Richard told me his offer would be valid until midnight. He said he'd love to have me there any time. Richard Harrison had been Rebecca's client for 3 years. She had completely restructured his investment portfolio, saving him millions in taxes and multiplying his returns. He trusted her implicitly and, 2 months prior, during a meeting in his office, had offered her tickets to the gala. Rebecca had declined, saying she preferred to keep the relationship strictly professional. Richard had insisted, leaving the invitation open. It was time to accept. I'll call now, Diane said. Rebecca could hear the sound of frantic typing on the other end. And Rebecca, go get 'em. 30 minutes later, Rebecca stood in front of the mirror again, but this time it was a completely different woman who stared back at her. She had chosen the blood-red Elie Saab gown she kept for special occasions, the one with an asymmetrical neckline and a strategic slit. Her dark brown hair fell in soft waves, and her makeup accentuated her piercing green eyes. The diamond necklace she had bought for herself the previous year, when she closed the biggest deal of her career, sparkled at her neck. Diane had called back 15 minutes earlier. Richard had been enthusiastic about the call. He had said that Rebecca would be his guest of honor, and that he would make sure to introduce her to everyone as the financial genius who had transformed his investments. He would send a limousine to pick her up immediately. As she descended to the building's lobby, Rebecca felt something new burning in her chest. It wasn't just anger or pain. It was cold, calculated determination. Matthew and Ashley were there, at that very moment, probably laughing, dancing, believing that Rebecca was at home, oblivious to everything. They had no idea of the hurricane that was about to hit them. The black limousine was parked in front of the building, the driver holding the door open. Rebecca got in, feeling the soft leather beneath her legs. As the car glided through the illuminated streets of Los Angeles towards Bel Air, she opened her phone once more. Ashley had posted 3 new photos. One of them showed Matthew whispering something in her ear as she laughed. The caption read, "When you're with the right people, everything just falls into place perfectly." Rebecca gave a cold smile. "Oh, darling," she thought, "you have no idea what it means for things to fall into place, but you're about to learn." The Harrison mansion emerged from the Bel Air hills like a modern fairy tale palace, all lit up by golden lights that made the windows gleam against the dark Los Angeles sky. Rebecca watched from the limousine window as the vehicle ascended the private driveway, flanked by perfectly aligned Italian cypresses. Marble fountains gushed illuminated water, and uniformed valets scurried back and forth, parking Bentleys, Ferraris, and Rolls-Royces as if they were ordinary cars. The driver stopped in front of the main entrance, where a white marble staircase led to double-carved mahogany doors. A butler in livery opened the limousine door, extending a gloved hand to help her out. "Good evening, madam. Mr. Harrison awaits you in the main ballroom." Rebecca accepted the hand and emerged from the car, feeling all eyes turned to her. A couple descending from a yellow Lamborghini stopped halfway, watching her. She kept her head high, shoulders back, each step measured and confident as she ascended the staircase. Inside, her heart beat like a war drum. The mansion's interior was breathtaking, even for those accustomed to luxury. The entrance hall had a triple-height ceiling, with a baccarat crystal chandelier that must have been 3 meters in diameter hanging from above. The walls were clad in cream Italian marble with gold veins, and paintings that Rebecca recognized as originals by Impressionist masters decorated every available space. A Monet here, a Renoir there, as if they were ordinary wall posters. The sound of live classical music floated through the air, mingling with the elegant murmur of conversations and laughter. A chamber orchestra played somewhere further ahead. Waiters circulated with trays of Dom Perignon champagne and canapés that probably cost more than an ordinary person's weekly salary. "Rebecca!" Richard Harrison's deep, warm voice cut through the buzz. He strode across the ballroom towards her, a tall man in his early 60s, with perfectly combed gray hair, wearing a Brioni tuxedo that probably cost more than a new car. His blue eyes gleamed with genuine pleasure. "You came! I couldn't believe it when my assistant told me you'd accepted the invitation." He took her hands in his, lightly kissing her cheek in an elegant greeting. "Richard, thank you for having me at such a late hour," Rebecca replied, forcing a warm smile despite the storm raging inside her. "Late? The night has barely begun, and you look absolutely stunning. That red is devastating." He offered his arm. "Come, I need to introduce you to some people. By the way, there's a couple here who are specifically looking for someone with your expertise in portfolio restructuring. The Vanderbilts, from the pharmaceutical sector." As Richard led her through the main ballroom, Rebecca scanned the room with her eyes. The room was colossal, with 2 curved marble staircases leading to the second floor, where more guests leaned on the balustrades, observing the party below. Monumental floral arrangements of white roses and rare orchids decorated each table. In the center of the ballroom, a space had been cleared for dancing, where elegantly dressed couples moved to the sound of the orchestra. And then she saw them. Matthew was near the bar, his profile unmistakable even from a distance. The Tom Ford tuxedo she had bought him last Christmas fit perfectly on his broad shoulders. He held a glass of whiskey, laughing at something someone had said. And by his side, like an apparition out of a fashion magazine, was Ashley. The sapphire blue Versace gown shimmered under the chandelier lights, embracing every curve of her young body. Ashley gestured animatedly as she talked to a group of people, her crystalline laugh reaching Rebecca even through the music and conversations. She frequently touched Matthew's arm, those possessive touches that declared ownership without words. Rebecca felt bile rise in her throat, but she kept her face perfectly composed. Years of negotiating with ruthless executives and difficult billionaires had taught her the art of absolute self-control. "Rebecca?" Richard noticed her distraction. "Is everything all right?" "Perfectly fine," she replied, tearing her eyes away from Matthew and Ashley. "I was just admiring the orchestra. Is that the Los Angeles Philharmonic? A selected string quartet, actually. But speaking of music..." Richard waved to someone across the room. "Ah, there are the Vanderbilts, Charles, Vanessa." A couple in their 50s approached, she wearing an ivory Chanel dress, he in a classic tuxedo. Richard made the introductions, and Rebecca slipped into automatic professional mode, discussing investment strategies, asset diversification, and tax planning. Part of her mind was fully focused on the conversation, But another part kept Matthew and Ashley on the peripheral radar of her vision. Ashley had moved away from the group and was now taking selfies near a bronze sculpture, striking exaggerated poses. Even from that distance, Rebecca could see the phone's flash as she posted photo after photo. Matthew watched her with an indulgent smile, like a proud father watching a child show off. The nausea returned, stronger this time. "So, what do you think, Rebecca?" Charles Vanderbilt brought her back to the conversation. "Pardon me, Charles. Could you repeat the question?" "I was asking your opinion on hedge funds versus direct investments in biotech startups." Rebecca forced herself to focus. "It depends on your risk appetite and investment horizon. Hedge funds offer diversification and professional management, but with significant fees. Direct investments can bring exponential returns, but also substantial risks. For the pharmaceutical sector specifically, I would recommend a mixed approach." She continued, her mind split between the technical conversation and her acute awareness of Matthew and Ashley across the ballroom. With each passing minute, Ashley seemed to grow more animated, her voice rising, her laughter getting louder. She was clearly intoxicated, not necessarily by alcohol, but by being there, in that environment, believing she belonged to that world. "Rebecca is brilliant," Richard commented to the Vanderbilts. "She tripled my returns on real estate investments in the last 18 months, and the strategy she developed for my international assets was simply genius." "We have to schedule a meeting," Vanessa Vanderbilt said, touching Rebecca's arm. "Our current consultant is competent, but honestly, after hearing Richard talk so much about you, I'm curious." Rebecca handed over her card, smiling gracefully, while her eyes caught Ashley approaching a group of older women, clearly wives of other important guests. The young blonde intruded into their conversation with that artificial confidence of youth, holding her champagne flute as if it were a fashion accessory. "Excuse me for interrupting." Ashley's voice reached Rebecca, too loud for the setting. "But I just had to say I love your jewelry. It's Cartier, right? My boyfriend always says that women of true class know how to choose the right pieces." The women exchanged glances. One of them, whom Rebecca recognized as Victoria Chen, wife of tech magnate David Chen, raised an eyebrow. "Your boyfriend seems to have strong opinions about jewelry," Victoria replied, her tone polite but frosty. "Oh, he does. Matthew is very particular about these things. He works in real estate investments, you know? Deals with high-level people all the time." Ashley gestured broadly, almost spilling champagne on the woman next to her. "Actually, he's the one who chose my dress. Versace, naturally. $12,000, can you believe it? But he said I deserved the best." Rebecca felt every muscle in her body tense. Across the ballroom, Matthew had joined a group of men, probably talking business, completely oblivious to the spectacle his mistress was causing. $12,000? One of the women repeated, her tone suggesting it was both impressive and slightly vulgar. Truly wealthy people didn't talk about prices. "I know. It's crazy, right? But when you're with someone generous—" Ashley shrugged, a smug smile on her rose-painted lips. "And Matthew is very, very generous." Rebecca watched, morbidly fascinated, as Ashley continued to dig her own hole. Not just because of the lack of class in discussing prices, but because of the way the women around her began to exchange significant glances. The world of the Los Angeles elite was small, and gossip traveled fast. "Rebecca?" Richard's voice brought her back. "Dinner is about to be served. Would you mind sitting at the main table with me? My wife Patricia would love to talk to you about her foundation." "It would be an honor," Rebecca replied. As she followed Richard towards the adjacent dining hall, she purposefully walked close to the group where Ashley was still chattering. The young blonde was so engrossed in her own narrative that she didn't even notice Rebecca passing just meters away. But Matthew noticed. His eyes met hers across the crowded room, and Rebecca saw the exact moment recognition hit his face. The color drained from his cheeks. His mouth parted slightly. The glass of whiskey in his hand trembled, the amber liquid almost overflowing. Rebecca held his gaze for 3 long, deliberate seconds. Then, slowly, she smiled. Not a warm or friendly smile, but something cold and sharp as an ice blade, and continued walking, leaving Matthew frozen in place, as panic began to settle in his eyes. The Harrison Mansion's dining hall was a masterpiece of elegance and calculated excess. 3 long, polished mahogany tables occupied the space, each seating 20 guests, with low but stunning floral arrangements running down the center. Solid silver cutlery gleamed under the light of crystal chandeliers, and each place was marked with handwritten name cards in perfect calligraphy. The walls were adorned with golden silk panels, and more paintings that were probably worth millions. Rebecca was led to the main table, strategically positioned in the center of the hall, slightly elevated above the others on a discreet platform. Richard Harrison seated her to his right, while his wife Patricia, an elegant woman with platinum blonde hair and a genuine smile, occupied the spot to his left. From her privileged seat, Rebecca had a full view of the entire hall. Her eyes found Matthew and Ashley being directed to one of the side tables, considerably distant from the main one. Matthew seemed agitated, constantly glancing in her direction, his face a mask of thinly veiled anxiety. Ashley, on the other hand, was too busy admiring the surroundings and taking more photos to notice her companion's tension. The sight was as predictable as it was pathetic. Matthew must have bought regular tickets, probably using some secondary contact, unaware that there was a strict hierarchy even within an event like that. $50,000 bought entry, but it didn't buy relevance or position. Richard told me you completely transformed his investment strategy. Patricia leaned in to converse, her voice soft but sharp with intelligence. Rebecca immediately realized she wasn't just facing a trophy wife, but an astute woman in her own right. My foundation could use someone with your expertise. We manage nearly $100 million in annual donations, but honestly, I feel we could do more with better financial planning. Rebecca forced herself to focus on the conversation, even though her peripheral awareness was fully attuned to Matthew and Ashley. Nonprofit organizations often have untapped potential in their investment structures. With the right planning, it's possible to maximize the impact of every dollar without compromising the security of primary assets. As Patricia asked more questions, waiters began to serve the first course: grilled scallops with truffled cauliflower puree and microgreens. The aroma was heavenly, but Rebecca could barely taste it as she discreetly observed the table where Matthew and Ashley were seated. Ashley had pulled out her phone again, clearly posting more photos. The other guests at their table seemed politely uninterested, turning to conversations with other neighbors. Matthew tried to maintain some conversation, but kept casting furtive glances in Rebecca's direction, like a criminal checking if the police were on his trail. Because that was exactly what he was. A criminal. Someone who had stolen not just money, but trust. Years of a shared life. The future they had planned together. Rebecca? Patricia lightly touched her arm. We lost you for a moment. Sorry. Rebecca smiled, taking a sip of the impeccable white wine that had been served. I was just processing some ideas for your foundation. In fact, I have some strategies that could increase your returns by at least 20% annually, allowing more resources for your causes. Patricia's eyes lit up. We need to schedule a formal meeting. Next week? That would be perfect. The dinner continued through multiple courses: lamb Wellington with an herb crust, accompanied by roasted asparagus and dauphinoise potatoes, arugula salad with caramelized pears and gorgonzola cheese, and finally, a chocolate soufflé that arrived at the table still steaming, served with Madagascar vanilla ice cream. With each course, more wine was served, and conversations grew livelier. Richard introduced Rebecca to virtually everyone at the main table: a Hollywood studio director, two heiresses to industrial fortunes, a celebrity plastic surgeon, a corporate lawyer who represented 3 Fortune 500 companies. Each introduction was accompanied by effusive praise from Richard about Rebecca's skills, her successes, her strategic vision. Rebecca felt simultaneously flattered and surreal, as if she were watching her own life from outside her body. Part of her simply wanted to enjoy that moment of professional validation and recognition. But the other part, the wounded and furious part, kept her attention fixed on the table where her husband entertained his mistress with her money. Between the main course and dessert, some guests began to circulate again, visiting other tables, renewing contacts. Ashley took the opportunity to stand up, swaying slightly in her 4-inch Christian Louboutin heels, and headed towards what appeared to be the ladies' restroom. Rebecca observed her path, noticing how the young blonde frequently stopped to admire paintings or take more selfies, always with that exaggerated expression of awe that screamed newcomer in truly luxurious environments. "Excuse me." Rebecca gracefully rose, placing her napkin on her chair. "I'll just refresh my makeup before dessert." Patricia nodded with understanding, and Rebecca followed the same path Ashley had taken, her Jimmy Choo heels making a soft, confident sound against the marble. The ladies' restroom was, predictably, more luxurious than most living rooms. White marble with golden veins covered all surfaces. Mirrors illuminated with perfect makeup lighting occupied an entire wall, and there was a separate sitting area with cream velvet sofas. Fresh flowers in crystal vases perfumed the air with the scent of lilies and gardenias. Ashley stood in front of the mirrors, reapplying her lipstick and taking more photos of herself, experimenting with different angles. She didn't notice Rebecca enter, so engrossed was she in her own image. Rebecca stood still for a moment, just observing. Ashley was pretty in an obvious way, with that youthful beauty that came more from youth itself than from particularly striking features. Blonde hair that probably came from expensive bottles, a spray tan, lash extensions, perfectly manicured nails. It was a manufactured, bought beauty, maintained with the kind of constant upkeep that demanded time and money. And Matthew had chosen that generic version of glamour over 7 years of shared history. Ashley finally noticed Rebecca's presence reflected in the mirror. She turned, her eyes scanning Rebecca from head to toe in that quick, competitive assessment women instinctively make of each other. "Hi," Ashley said, her tone carrying that superficial cordiality of ladies' restrooms. "Your dress is beautiful. Elie Saab?" "It is," Rebecca replied, approaching the mirrors and opening her Bottega Veneta clutch to retrieve her lipstick. "And yours is Versace, right? From the spring collection." Ashley's eyes lit up, clearly pleased to have her dress recognized. "It is. You have a great eye. I love Versace. So daring, so sexy, you know? Perfect for a night like this." "Absolutely." Rebecca applied her lipstick with perfectly steady hands, though her heart was beating like a drum. "It's quite an investment. Those gowns aren't cheap." "Oh, but it's totally worth it when you have a man who appreciates those things." Ashley leaned closer to the mirror, adjusting a blonde curl. "My boyfriend insisted I buy something special for tonight. He said I deserved to wear the best." How generous of him, Rebecca commented, her voice perfectly neutral. He's amazing like that. Matthew, my boyfriend, he's different, you know? Not like these young guys who just want to hang out and have nothing to offer. He's mature, established, knows how to treat a real woman. Every word was a knife slowly twisting between Rebecca's ribs. But she maintained her serene expression, simply touching up her makeup, as if this were the most casual conversation in the world. Matthew, Rebecca repeated thoughtfully. That's not such a common name around here. What field does he work in? Ashley brightened, clearly loving the opportunity to talk about him. Real estate investments. He has his own firm, deals with high-level clients. Actually, he was married before, but... She lowered her voice conspiratorially, as if they were sharing gossip between friends. His ex-wife was all wrong for him. He told me she was cold, always focused on work. No time for the important things in life. No romance, you know. Rebecca felt something cold settle in her stomach, but she kept her face impassive. Ex-wife? So he's divorced? Well, technically they're still married on paper, but he told me the marriage ended a long time ago. It's just a matter of formalizing it. Ashley applied more lip gloss, pouting in the mirror. She doesn't even care about him, according to Matthew. She's always traveling for meetings, working late. What kind of wife does that? A man needs attention, to be valued. I see, Rebecca murmured, putting her lipstick back in her bag. Each revelation was like watching a slow-motion car crash, horrifying but impossible to look away from. And you know what's funny? Ashley turned fully to Rebecca now, as if speaking to a confidant. Maybe the champagne was loosening her tongue, or perhaps she was just oblivious enough not to notice the appropriate boundaries. He even uses her corporate credit card sometimes. The ex-wife's, I mean. She doesn't even notice. It's like, if you're not paying attention to your marriage or your finances, you can't complain when someone else steps in, right? Rebecca felt her anger transform into something cold and crystalline inside her. It was no longer just about the betrayal or about the money. It was about the complete lack of respect, the distorted narrative Matthew had created where she was the villain, the negligent wife who somehow deserved to be cheated on and robbed. Interesting philosophy, Rebecca said softly, closing her clutch with a definitive click. Oh, I didn't mean that. Ashley seemed to realize, a little too late, that perhaps she had said too much. It's just that you know how relationships are. Complicated. They are indeed, Rebecca agreed, turning to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back. Ashley was checking her phone again, probably to post another photo. Enjoy the night, darling. Something tells me it's going to be memorable. She left the restroom before Ashley could reply, her heart hammering but her steps measured and controlled. As she walked back to the dining hall, Rebecca felt a final clarity settle over her like a cloak. There would be no more doubts, no more hesitations, no more parts of her wanting to believe that perhaps there was an explanation, some way to fix things. Matthew was not just an unfaithful husband. He was a manipulator, a thief, someone who had completely distorted reality to justify his actions. And Ashley was not just an unwitting mistress. She was complicit. Someone who knew exactly what she was doing, who reveled in using Rebecca's resources while ridiculing her behind her back. Rebecca returned to the main table just as dessert was being served. Richard smiled at her, raising his dessert wine glass. Perfect timing. I was just about to propose a toast. She sat, accepting her own glass, feeling all eyes at the head table turn to Richard as he rose. The moment had arrived, and Rebecca was more than ready. Richard Harrison remained standing, his glass raised, commanding the natural attention of one accustomed to being heard. The murmur of conversations in the dining hall gradually subsided until an expectant silence settled over the room. Even the orchestra in the adjacent ballroom reduced its volume, leaving only a soft melody in the background. "Friends," Siebend. Richard's voice was firm and warm. "I want to thank you all for being here on this very special evening. 10 years ago, my wife Patricia and I decided to transform this mansion into a space for something greater than ourselves, a place where we could gather extraordinary people for extraordinary causes." Polite applause echoed through the hall. Rebecca maintained her composed demeanor, but her peripheral awareness caught Matthew at a side table, visibly tense, his rigid posture contrasting with Ashley's, who seemed bored by the speech, distractedly fiddling with her phone under the table. "This year," Richard continued, "we managed to raise $3 million for education programs in underprivileged communities. But money alone means nothing without the right people to manage it, multiply it, to make every cent work for those who need it most." He turned slightly, his gaze resting on Rebecca with genuine affection. "That's why I am particularly pleased to have with us tonight a woman who has not only transformed my financial life, but who represents everything that is best in our community. Rebecca Winters is more than a brilliant financial consultant. She is a visionary, a strategist, and above all, a person of absolute integrity." Rebecca felt the heat rise to her face as all eyes turned to her. Across the room, she saw Matthew swallow hard, the whiskey glass trembling in his hand. Ashley had finally looked up from her phone, a confused expression beginning to form on her face as she processed the name Richard had just uttered. "Rebecca took my portfolio," Richard continued, "which was doing fine but stagnant, and transformed it into something extraordinary. She identified opportunities that my previous consultants hadn't even considered. She tripled my returns on real estate investments, completely restructured my tax strategy, saving millions, and did all of this with an ethics and transparency that are rare in our world." More applause, warmer this time. Patricia leaned over and squeezed Rebecca's hand under the table, a gesture of feminine solidarity that brought unexpected tears to Rebecca's eyes. "So I want to make a toast." Richard raised his glass higher. "To Rebecca Winters, a true master of her craft, and to the integrity she represents. May we all learn from her example." "To Rebecca." The chorus echoed through the hall, glasses clinking, smiling faces turning in her direction. Rebecca rose gracefully, nodding in thanks, forcing a smile she hoped appeared humble, and not the shield it truly was. When her eyes met Matthew's across the room, she saw pure terror plastered on his face. He finally understood. She wasn't there by accident. She wasn't just another anonymous guest lost in the crowd. Ashley, in turn, seemed to be connecting the dots in slow motion, her face going through a sequence of expressions: confusion, recognition, and then, gradually, mounting horror. Dinner proceeded, but the atmosphere had shifted. Guests from the head table approached Rebecca between courses, offering business cards, requesting meetings, praising her work. She accepted everything with professional grace, one part of her mind completely focused on the interactions, another part observing Matthew and Ashley with the precision of a hawk. Matthew had pulled Ashley close, whispering urgently in her ear. Her expression fluctuated between disbelief and growing panic. She repeatedly looked in Rebecca's direction, as if trying to reconcile the elegant, powerful woman seated at the head table with the negligent, uninteresting wife Matthew had described. When dinner finally concluded and guests began returning to the main ballroom for the continuation of the party, Rebecca accepted the arm Richard offered. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly as they walked. "I noticed a certain tension in you tonight. It's not my habit to pry, but I've known you long enough to know when something's amiss." Rebecca hesitated, then opted for a partial truth. "There's a personal situation I need to resolve tonight. Nothing that will affect our business or my professional capacity, but let's just say there are people here who weren't expecting to see me." Richard's experienced eyes studied her for a moment. "Do you need any support? My security team is excellent and very discreet." "Not yet," Rebecca replied, "but I appreciate the offer. I might need it soon." In the main ballroom, the party had gained new energy. The chamber orchestra had been replaced by a DJ playing sophisticated ambient music. Loud enough for dancing, but low enough for conversations to continue. Couples moved gracefully across the makeshift dance floor, while others gathered in small groups, sipping champagne and strengthening business connections disguised as socializing. Rebecca accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and strategically positioned herself near one of the monumental sculptures decorating the hall, a spot from which she could observe everything without appearing to be watching. It didn't take long. Ashley was clearly agitated, gesturing animatedly as she talked to Matthew, her voice occasionally rising above an appropriate volume. Matthew tried to calm her, holding her arm, attempting to lead her to a more discreet corner. But Ashley was visibly too distraught to care about discretion. They moved towards one of the terraces overlooking the illuminated gardens, likely seeking privacy. Rebecca observed their path, waited a few minutes, then casually followed in the same direction, stopping to greet a few guests along the way, maintaining appearances. The terrace was expansive, overlooking an infinity pool that seemed to merge with the lights of Los Angeles scattered in the valley below. Japanese lanterns floated gently in the night breeze, creating patterns of light and shadow. Only a few couples occupied the space, enjoying the fresh air and the spectacular view. Matthew and Ashley were in a more secluded corner, partially hidden by a large planter with a decorative palm tree, but their voices carried clearly on the silent night air. "You told me she didn't care!" Ashley's voice was shrill, her panic evident. "You said the marriage was dead, that she didn't even pay attention to you." "Keep your voice down," Matthew hissed, glancing nervously around. "I didn't know she would be Richard Harrison's guest of honor." "How could I have known?" "Guest of honor? Matthew, she's his personal financial consultant. Did you hear what he said? She tripled his investments. She's not just some random employee, she's—" Ashley stopped, realization hitting her in waves. "The corporate card. You said it was from a company, that she didn't even look at the statements." "She doesn't look. She usually doesn't look." "But the dress, Matthew. The dress you bought me. Was it on her card? The tickets for tonight? Was everything with her money?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Rebecca moved closer, keeping to the shadows, her heart pounding but her mind crystal clear. She needed to hear this, needed the full reality of the situation to solidify before she acted. "My God," Ashley continued, her voice now a mix of horror and anger. "You made me wear a dress bought with your wife's money? You brought me to an event paid for with her card? While she was being honored as some kind of financial genius?" "Ashley, calm down. We can fix this." "Fix it? How are you going to fix this? She's here, Matthew. She saw me. She knows everything." Ashley laughed, a hysterical sound. "And you know what's worse? Do you know what's really, truly worse? I talked to her in the restroom. I chatted with her about you, about how generous you were, about how you paid for my dress, about how your ex-wife didn't pay attention to anything. You what? I didn't know it was her. How was I supposed to know? You showed me a picture of her from years ago, all serious and corporate. Not a stunning woman in a red gala gown being treated like royalty. Rebecca felt a cold satisfaction hearing this. The universe was aligning perfectly, each piece falling into exactly where it should. "We need to go," Matthew was saying, his voice tense. "We need to get out of here before this gets worse." "Worse? How could it get worse?" "Trust me, it can get much worse if Rebecca decides to make a scene. She has connections here, power, if she wants to destroy us. You should have thought of that before." Ashley practically screamed now. "Before turning me into the pathetic other woman wearing jewels and dresses bought with your wife's money. My God, what a disgusting cliché." "Let me think." Matthew ran his hands through his hair, gesticulating frantically. "I can talk to her, explain. Maybe if I—" "Explain what exactly?" Rebecca's voice cut through the night air like a blade, cold and clear. Both froze, turning to find her emerging from the shadows, an apparition in blood red, her diamond necklace glinting under the Japanese lanterns. Rebecca walked slowly towards them, each step measured, her hands calmly holding her clutch, her face a mask of absolute control. Matthew visibly blanched, all color draining from his cheeks. Ashley took an instinctive step back, stumbling slightly in her heels. "Rebecca," Matthew began, his voice failing, "I can explain." "Can you?" Rebecca stopped a few feet from them, maintaining a safe distance but completely dominating the space. "Please, then. I'm very curious to hear the explanation of how my husband stole $12,000 from my corporate card to buy a Versace dress for his mistress. Or perhaps you'd prefer to start by explaining the $50,000 used to buy tickets for tonight. Both using my company's funds, of course." Ashley let out a low whimper, covering her face with her hands. Matthew opened and closed his mouth several times, like a fish out of water, clearly searching for words that wouldn't come. "No?" Rebecca continued, her voice dangerously soft. "Then how about explaining how you convinced this poor girl that I was a terrible, negligent wife? How you twisted our entire history to justify your betrayal?" "I didn't. It wasn't," Matthew stammered, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "Because you see," Rebecca took another step forward, her green eyes fixed on him like a predator studying its prey. "I was at home working all those nights you claimed to have meetings. I was building the career that supports our lifestyle while your company barely made a profit. I was being the wife who trusted you, who believed in you." Her voice remained controlled, but there was a subtle tremor now, real emotion leaking through the cracks in her armor. 7 years, Matthew. 7 years of marriage. And you didn't just betray me. You stole from me. You used my money, my work, my success to buy gifts for her. Ashley finally found her voice, tearful and desperate. "I didn't know. He told me you didn't care, that the marriage was over, that you were just husband and wife on paper." Rebecca turned her gaze to Ashley, and the young blonde recoiled again before the intensity of those icy green eyes. "And you believed that? Believed it was acceptable to be with a married man, use his things, spend his money, even if the marriage was over on paper? Does that make you feel better?" Tears began to stream down Ashley's carefully applied makeup, mascara leaving dark trails on her cheeks. I'm so sorry." "No," Rebecca interrupted coldly. "You're not. You're ashamed of being caught. There's a difference." Matthew finally found some courage, taking a step forward. "Rebecca, please, Can we discuss this in private? Not here. Not like this. Not like this, Rebecca laughed, a humorless sound. You mean, not where your mistress can hear? Not where other people can witness? Where exactly would be appropriate, Matthew? At home? So you could somehow convince me this was all a misunderstanding? At your lawyer's office, where you'd already be prepared with counter-arguments? She shook her head slowly. No. We're going to settle this here and now. In front of her. In front of everyone, if necessary. Because you made a point of bringing this into the public sphere when you decided to parade your mistress at the most important social event in Beverly Hills. Rebecca turned slightly, her eyes sweeping the terrace. More couples had noticed the tension and were watching discreetly, pretending to be engrossed in conversation but clearly paying attention to the unfolding drama. She smiled coldly. The stage was set. It was time for the final act. Rebecca maintained her upright posture, shoulders back, as she watched Matthew fall apart before her. The man who had once seemed so confident, so charming, now visibly sweated under the Tom Ford tuxedo she herself had bought. His hands trembled around the empty whiskey glass, and he alternated his gaze between Rebecca and Ashley, as if searching for some escape route that simply didn't exist. Ashley had moved a few steps away, leaning against the terrace balustrade, her fingers gripping the cold marble as if it could somehow anchor the reality crumbling around her. The sapphire blue Versace dress, which minutes ago had made her feel powerful and desirable, now seemed a shameful burden hanging on her body. Every embroidered Swarovski crystal seemed to scream the sordid story of its origin. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft music drifting from the main ballroom and the distant murmur of other guests. Rebecca knew they needed witnesses for what was to come, but not a full crowd. Not yet. The few couples on the terrace, feigning inattention but clearly absorbing every word, every gesture, were audience enough for now. You know what's most pathetic about all this? Rebecca finally broke the silence, her voice soft but cutting like sharp glass. It's not the betrayal itself. Marriages end. People fall in love with others. That happens. It's human, albeit painful. She took another step towards Matthew, who instinctively recoiled. The pathetic part is the cowardice, the theft, the fact that you didn't just betray me, but you used me as a personal bank to fund your sordid affair. You didn't even have the decency to use your own money, Matthew, because you don't have real money, do you? Matthew opened his mouth to protest, but Rebecca raised a hand, silencing him. Your company is sustained by 3 main clients, all contacts I secured for you. Your real estate investments have had mediocre returns for the past 2 years. If it weren't for my income, for my work, you'd be in a rented apartment in Studio City, not in our condo in Century City. The words fell like a hammer on an anvil, each one exposing a truth Matthew had strived to hide, perhaps even from himself. Ashley watched with wide eyes, processing each revelation, realizing that the successful man who had promised to take care of her was, in fact, supported by the wife she had been taught to despise. I checked the statements tonight, Rebecca continued, pulling her phone from her clutch with deliberately slow movements. While the 2 of you were posing for photos and toasting with champagne bought with my money, my assistant compiled a full report of all unauthorized transactions. She slid her finger across the screen, her eyes scanning the numbers she had already memorized. $12,340 at Versace, $50,000 for tonight's tickets. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? There are dinners at Nobu, Spago, MISTRESS, always for 2 people. A weekend stay at Montage Laguna Beach, $8,000. Jewelry from Tiffany, $3,500. A total of She paused dramatically. $87,920 in 3 months. Ashley let out a choked sound, something between a sob and a gasp. Matthew looked as if he was about to vomit, his skin taking on a greenish tint under the Japanese lanterns. $87,000, Rebecca repeated, putting away her phone. Almost $90,000 from my company's corporate card, used to sustain an extramarital affair. Do you have any idea what that represents legally, Matthew? It's not just adultery. It's fraud, embezzlement, a crime that could result in criminal charges. Matthew finally found his voice, though it came out strangled and desperate. Rebecca, please. I'll pay back every cent. I'll get a loan. I'll sell my share in the company. Anything. Just don't. Don't make this public. Think about your reputation, too. A scandal like this could affect your business. Rebecca laughed, an icy sound that made them both shiver. My reputation? You're worried about my reputation. She shook her head, incredulous. Matthew, I built my career on competence and results. My clients trust me because I deliver what I promise. Being a victim of marital fraud, if anything, only shows I'm human. But you? A man who steals from his own wife to impress a mistress. What kind of character does that demonstrate to your potential clients? The silence that followed was deafening. Matthew had no answer because there was no possible answer. He had dug his own grave, and now he was being forced to look into it. Ashley stepped away from the balustrade, her steps uncertain as she approached. Her face was streaked with mascara, her eyes red and swollen from crying. When she spoke, her voice was small, broken, nothing like the jovial arrogance of hours earlier. I really didn't know about the card. About everything. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smudging her makeup further. He told me he had his own resources, that he was successful. I wouldn't have. I never would have accepted if I had known it was your money. Rebecca studied the young woman for a long moment. Part of her wanted to believe it, wanted to see Ashley as another victim of Matthew's manipulations. But the conversation in the restroom still echoed fresh in her mind. That casual arrogance in speaking about using his resources, that total lack of remorse in describing how Matthew neglected his wife. You may not have known specifically about the card, Rebecca said finally, her voice a little softer but still relentless, but you knew he was married. You knew you were getting involved with a man who had commitments, a life shared with someone else, and you made choices based on that. Ashley lowered her eyes, unable to maintain eye contact. She nodded weakly, a silent acknowledgement of the truth. But you are young, Rebecca continued, and you were clearly manipulated by someone who should know better. So, I'm going to give you something he never gave me, a chance to walk away from this with some dignity. Ashley looked up, surprise and confusion mixing in her expression. You will leave this event now, Rebecca instructed, her voice firm but not cruel. You will call a car, go home, and seriously reflect on your life choices. And if you're smart, you'll learn that material things bought with questionable money are never worth the price of your integrity. For a moment, Ashley just stood there, processing. Then she nodded again, more emphatically this time. Thank you. I will. I'll leave now. She started to walk away, but Rebecca called out to her once more. Ashley. The young blonde stopped, turning partially. The dress, Rebecca said calmly. It was bought with stolen money. Technically, it's my company's property. You can keep it as a memento of this evening, as a reminder that actions have consequences. but I suggest you never wear it again." Ashley swallowed hard, nodded one last time, and practically ran towards the main ballroom, her high heels clicking rapidly against the polished marble of the terrace. And then it was just Rebecca and Matthew, alone under the floating Japanese lanterns, with Los Angeles glittering like a sea of terrestrial stars in the valley below. The other couples on the terrace had discreetly withdrawn, sensing that the ensuing moment was not for casual onlookers. Matthew seemed to have aged 10 years in the last few minutes. His shoulders were slumped, the artificial confidence he always projected completely evaporated. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost inaudible. "I messed everything up, didn't I?" "Yes," Rebecca replied simply. There was no need to elaborate. "I don't know when or how this started to get out of control," he continued, more to himself than to her. "In the beginning, it was just attention. She made me feel relevant, admired. And you were always so busy, so focused on your clients, on your business. I started to feel like an accessory in your life." Rebecca felt the anger simmering again, but she kept it controlled. "So the solution was to betray and steal from me? To make me the villain in the narrative you created to justify your selfish choices?" "No," Matthew admitted, finally finding the courage to look her in the eyes. "There was no justification. I made terrible choices, driven by insecurity and a fragile ego. And now I will pay for them." "Yes, you will," Rebecca agreed. "And the payment starts now. Tomorrow morning, you will move out of the apartment. I'll have the divorce papers prepared by the end of the week. And regarding the $87,000, you have two options. Return everything within the next 30 days, or I file a criminal complaint for fraud and embezzlement." Matthew nodded mechanically, utterly defeated. "And my company?" "My clients. Your clients were my contacts to begin with," Rebecca said coldly. "And after tonight, after what happened here inevitably circulates through Beverly Hills social circles, I doubt many will want to continue doing business with you. But that's not my problem. You created this situation. You will deal with the consequences." She turned to leave, then stopped, looking back one last time. "You know what the saddest part of all this is, Matthew? I actually loved you. I built my life around us, around our future together. And you threw it all away for what? To feel relevant? For superficial attention from a girl who barely knew the world?" Matthew had no answer. Tears finally began to well in his eyes, the full reality of what he had lost finally penetrating his layers of denial and self-deception. Rebecca didn't wait to see if he would cry. She had already shed too many tears over that man. She turned decisively and walked back into the main ballroom, each step firm and purposeful, leaving Matthew alone on the terrace with the wreckage of his life and marriage. As she entered the ballroom, the music enveloped her again, the buzz of conversations and laughter resuming. Richard Harrison saw her from afar and waved, a questioning look in his eyes. Rebecca smiled and waved back, signaling that everything was under control. Because it was. For the first time in months, Rebecca felt she was truly in control of her own life. Rebecca walked through the main ballroom with her head held high, finally allowing herself to feel the weight of what had just transpired. Each step was a silent affirmation of her strength, but inside, emotions began to overflow the carefully constructed barriers. She needed a moment, just a moment of privacy, before fully returning to the role of the brilliant, unshakable financial consultant. She found refuge in a small library on the second floor, a space Richard had shown her during a tour of the mansion months ago. The mahogany-paneled walls held rare first-edition volumes, and the room smelled of aged leather and old pages. A single arched glass window offered a view of the illuminated gardens below, where fountains danced under colorful lights. Rebecca allowed herself to sink into a leather armchair near the window, finally releasing the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed her clutch in her lap, and she observed them with clinical detachment, as if they belonged to someone else. 7 years. 7 years of her life invested in a marriage Matthew had discarded as if it were disposable. It wasn't just the recent months of betrayal that hurt, but the way he had rewritten their entire history in his mind, turning her into the negligent villain to justify his own character flaws. The tears came then, silent and hot, sliding down her cheeks and staining the red silk of her Ailey Saab dress. She didn't try to stop them, allowing herself these minutes of vulnerability away from judgmental eyes and ever-present phone cameras. A soft sound at the door made her look up quickly, wiping her face with the back of her hands. Patricia Harrison stood at the entrance, holding 2 champagne flutes, her expression conveying maternal understanding without asking intrusive questions. "Richard told me you might be needing a moment," Patricia said softly, entering and closing the door behind her. "And perhaps company, or just champagne. Sometimes it's hard to tell which is more necessary." Rebecca accepted the offered glass, forcing a grateful smile. "Thank you. For everything. For hosting me tonight. For not asking questions." Patricia sat in the adjacent armchair, her own hands holding her glass with practiced elegance. "My dear, when you reach my age and live in this world long enough, you learn to recognize certain patterns. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, but know that this is a safe space." A comfortable, undemanding silence settled between them. Rebecca took a sip of champagne, feeling the delicate bubbles gently burst on her tongue. Her mind was already reorganizing, processing the next practical steps she would need to take. Divorce lawyer, review of all joint accounts, password changes, complete separation of assets. "May I ask something?" Patricia finally broke the silence, her voice gentle. Rebecca nodded, bracing herself for the inevitable question about Matthew. "How did you manage to maintain such composure down there? I watched you when Richard made the toast. I saw something flash in your eyes, but you remained absolutely serene, professional. Is that training or pure willpower?" Rebecca considered the question, surprised by its nature. "Both, I suppose. I've spent years negotiating with men who try to intimidate me in boardrooms, who assume that because I'm a woman, I'm less capable or easily manipulated. I learned to create an armor, a version of myself that is unshakable in public." "And when the armor comes off?" Patricia asked, subtly gesturing to the drying tears on Rebecca's face. "Then I'm just human," Rebecca admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "Someone who just discovered her marriage was a lie, who trusted the wrong person, who was stolen from and betrayed by the person who promised to love her." Patricia reached out, covering Rebecca's hand with her own, the gesture maternal and comforting. "Do you know what I see when I look at you? I see a woman who turned betrayal into power, who could have stayed home crying, but chose to face the situation head-on. That's not just strength, Rebecca. It's courage." The words pierced Rebecca's armor more deeply than she expected, bringing a new wave of emotion that she swallowed with effort. "I don't feel courageous. I feel exhausted, betrayed, as if the last 7 years were a complete waste." "They weren't," Patricia said firmly. "You built an extraordinary career in those 7 years. You established a reputation, connections, expertise that no one can take from you. The marriage may have failed, but you did not fail. Rebecca considered this, allowing the truth of the words to settle. Patricia was right. Matthew might have destroyed the marriage, but he hadn't touched her professional achievements, her identity built through hard work and smart decisions. "What would you do?" Rebecca asked impulsively. "If you were in my position?" Patricia took a long sip of champagne, her eyes distant as if accessing old memories. 20 years ago, I discovered Richard had a brief affair with a business associate. Nothing as calculated or prolonged as what you've faced. But betrayal is betrayal." Rebecca watched her, surprised, not expecting that confession. "I had a choice," Patricia continued. "I could have left, taken half of everything, started over. Or I could have stayed and rebuilt. I chose to stay, but on my own terms. Richard spent years proving he deserved a second chance, and I made sure never to lose my own identity in the marriage again." "Do you regret it?" Rebecca asked. "No," Patricia replied without hesitation. "But my situation was different. Richard showed genuine remorse, went to therapy, completely transformed himself. Your Matthew," she paused delicately, "seems to have created an entire narrative where you're to blame. That's not someone ready for real change." Rebecca nodded, feeling the external confirmation validate what her instinct already knew. There was no saving that marriage. Matthew had crossed lines that could not be uncrossed, not just with the physical betrayal, but with the theft, the lies, the complete distortion of their shared reality. "So what do I do now?" Rebecca asked, more to herself than to Patricia. "Now?" Patricia stood, smoothing her Chanel dress. "Now you finish your champagne, touch up your makeup, and go back downstairs. You have new potential clients waiting, connections to make, a reputation to continue building. Don't let him steal anything else from you, especially not tonight." Rebecca looked out the window, watching the guests circulating through the lit gardens below. She could see Ashley exiting through the side entrance, a solitary figure walking quickly towards the street where private cars waited. Matthew was somewhere downstairs, too, probably hiding in a corner, trying to avoid further confrontations. But Rebecca didn't need to avoid anyone. She had nothing to be ashamed of. Standing up, she walked over to an ornate mirror on the opposite wall. Her reflection showed the damage of the last few hours, smudged mascara, red eyes, but also something more. There was determination in her gaze, a newly forged hardness that hadn't been there when she woke that morning. Patricia appeared behind her in the reflection, extending an embroidered silk handkerchief. "For your makeup. And Rebecca, you will get through this. Not immediately, not without pain, but you will. And on the other side, you'll be even stronger than you are now." Rebecca accepted the handkerchief, carefully cleaning away the smudged mascara, recomposing her appearance with practiced movements. She applied fresh lipstick from her clutch, adjusted her diamond necklace, checked that the red dress still fell perfectly on her curves. When she turned to face Patricia again, it was the polished professional version of Rebecca Winters who stood there, her armor firmly in place. "Ready?" Patricia asked with an encouraging smile. "Ready," Rebecca confirmed, surprised to realize it was true. They descended together, Patricia serving as a silent shield and a symbol of alliance. When they entered the main ballroom, several heads turned, ill-disguised curiosity on many faces. The gossip had already begun to circulate. Rebecca could feel it in the way people whispered behind discreet hands. But instead of retreating, she walked directly to the center of the room, accepting another glass of champagne from a passing waiter. Richard saw her and immediately approached, his face showing paternal concern. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, positioning himself so he partially blocked Rebecca from the view of the most curious onlookers. "I am," Rebecca replied, and for the first time that night, she completely believed her own words. "In fact, I'm better than I've been in months. Sometimes you don't realize the weight you're carrying until you put it down." Richard studied her face for a moment, then nodded, satisfied. "The Vanderbilts were looking for you. And the Morrisons, too, that tech couple. Everyone wants to schedule consultations." "Then let's do business," Rebecca said, her smile becoming more genuine. "After all, that's what I came for." And as she moved through the ballroom, talking with potential clients, exchanging business cards, politely laughing at corporate jokes, Rebecca felt something new growing within her. It wasn't just relief or satisfied vengeance. It was liberation. Matthew had been revealed for what he truly was, and in doing so, he had inadvertently freed Rebecca from a prison she hadn't realized she was living in. A prison of unmet expectations, one-sided love, misplaced trust. Across the room, she saw him trying to discreetly sneak towards the exit, his shoulders hunched in defeat. Part of her felt a pang of something that might have been pity, but it passed quickly. Rebecca turned back to Charles Vanderbilt, who was describing the investment challenges faced by his pharmaceutical company, and fully immersed herself in the conversation. Because this was real. This was solid. Her career, her expertise, her worth independent of any relationship. The night continued to swirl around her. Music and laughter, and the clinking of crystal against crystal. And for the first time in a long time, Rebecca allowed herself to simply exist in that moment, free from the weight of a marriage that had been dead far longer than she had admitted. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but full of possibilities. And Rebecca Winters was more than ready to meet it. The next morning brought a cold clarity that Rebecca hadn't expected. She woke in her Century City apartment, the left side of the bed conspicuously empty, the sheets still perfectly smooth as they had been for days. Matthew hadn't come home after the ball, and Rebecca found she didn't miss him. What she felt was a strange kind of lightness, as if she had finally taken off tight shoes after years of discomfort. The Californian morning light streamed through the panoramic windows, golden and unforgiving, illuminating every corner of the apartment she now realized would be solely hers. Curiously, this prospect brought not fear or loneliness, but something akin to relief. Her phone vibrated constantly on the bedside table. Rebecca picked it up, expecting desperate messages from Matthew, but found something completely different. Diane had sent a series of texts overnight and early morning. "Rebecca, you need to see this. Social media is in a frenzy. Charles Vanderbilt has already called 3 times asking to schedule a meeting. Victoria Chen wants to transfer all of the family's asset management to you. The office has been getting calls since 7 this morning." Rebecca scrolled through the links Diane had sent. Apparently, several guests at the ball had witnessed or heard about the confrontation on the terrace. But instead of the public humiliation Matthew feared, the narrative that emerged on social media and in Beverly Hills gossip circles was completely different. Rebecca Winters, the financial consultant who transformed fortunes for LA's elite, exposed her unfaithful husband who was stealing from her to support a mistress at the most exclusive charity ball of the year. Read a viral Instagram post from a society influencer. Another from a luxury gossip blog. When keeping it classy meets justice, how one of Beverly Hills' brightest financial minds handled marital betrayal with absolute dignity. People weren't talking about scandal or shame. They were talking about strength, about a woman who refused to be silently victimized. The comments were overwhelmingly positive, women sharing their own stories of betrayal, admiring how Rebecca had handled the situation. And there was more. Ashley had deleted all her social media overnight. Matthew was also completely offline, but the damage to his reputation was already done. Several posts mentioned his name, describing him as the man who had stolen from his own successful wife to impress a young mistress. Rebecca's phone rang in her hand. It was Diane. "Did you see the messages?" Her assistant's voice was charged with nervous energy. "I did. Is this real?" "Absolutely. Rebecca, your business phone hasn't stopped ringing. I have a list of 17 people wanting consultations, including 3 names you'd never normally be able to reach. Apparently, everyone wants to work with the woman Richard Harrison calls a financial genius with nerves of steel." Rebecca got out of bed, walking to the window. Los Angeles stretched before her, the city waking under the morning sun. "Diane, can you start scheduling those meetings? And call Jonathan Reeves at Morrison & Associates law firm. I need LA's best divorce lawyers." "Already done. He can see you today at 3. "You're incredible." "I know. And Rebecca, I'm proud of you. What you did last night was brave." After hanging up, Rebecca took a long, hot shower, letting the water wash away not just the physical weariness, but symbolically the last traces of the marriage that had ended. As she dressed for the day, choosing a dark gray Armani suit that conveyed authority without arrogance, she reflected on how her life had turned upside down in less than 24 hours. Yesterday, she was a successful financial consultant trapped in a dying marriage she didn't have the courage to face. Today, she was a free woman with more professional opportunities than she could have imagined, and a survival story that resonated with thousands. The law firm Morrison & Associates occupied 3 floors of a skyscraper in downtown Los Angeles. Jonathan Reeves was known as the city's most ruthless divorce attorney, someone who protected his clients' interests with surgical ferocity. He received her in a conference room overlooking the city, a man in his 50s with perfectly cut gray hair and discreet framed glasses that did little to soften his piercing gaze. "Ms. Winters," he began, gesturing for her to sit. "Or should I say, Mrs., though I imagine you prefer the former after what happened." "Rebecca is fine," she replied, sitting down and placing her briefcase on the table. Jonathan opened a digital file on his tablet. "I did my research after your assistant's call. Married 7 years to Matthew Winters. No children. Considerable assets in your name, including the Century City apartment, a substantial investment portfolio, and a successful financial consulting firm." "Correct," Rebecca confirmed. "And Mr. Winters?" Jonathan asked, his fingers gliding across the screen. "His real estate investment firm seems to have had mediocre performance in recent years. I see here that most of his clients came through your connections." "Yes, I helped him establish practically his entire business." Jonathan made quick notes. "And about the corporate card. Your assistant sent me the statements. $87,000 in unauthorized transactions?" "Exactly." "That gives us an excellent foundation. Fraud, embezzlement, complete breach of fiduciary trust." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, studying Rebecca with professional interest. "Honestly, Rebecca, this is one of the clearest cases I have ever seen. You have documentation of everything, witnesses to the public confrontation, and apparently the support of public opinion. Matthew Winters doesn't have a leg to stand on. So what do I recommend? Fault-based divorce due to adultery and financial fraud. You retain all assets acquired during the marriage, considering they were primarily financed by you. He receives nothing beyond what he can prove he directly contributed. And regarding the $87,000, you have two options: include it in the divorce settlement as a debt he must repay, or pursue criminal charges. Rebecca considered this. The prospect of criminally prosecuting Matthew had a certain vengeful appeal, but she recognized that it was anger speaking, not reason. "I want the $87,000 back, but I'd prefer to resolve this civilly if possible. Not for his sake, but because I don't want to prolong this more than necessary." Jonathan nodded approvingly. "A mature approach. I'll prepare the documents today. But Rebecca, I need to ask, are you prepared for what comes next? Divorces can get ugly, even the clearest ones. Matthew might try to claim rights to your company, allege he contributed to your success." "Let him try," Rebecca said calmly. "I have documentation for everything. Records of every client I brought in, every strategy I developed, every hour I worked. He can claim whatever he wants, but facts are facts." "That's the right attitude," Jonathan smiled, clearly pleased with his client. "I'll be frank. I've seen women in similar situations, betrayed and robbed, who still feel guilty, who still try to protect the men who hurt them. You're not doing that, and it's refreshing." Rebecca thought about this as Jonathan continued explaining the legal procedures. She had expected to feel guilt, some impulse to soften the blow for Matthew, to somehow share the responsibility. But she didn't. Perhaps it would come later, when the adrenaline of the situation wore off. Or perhaps it would never come, because Matthew had made choices. Conscious, repeated choices, over many months. It wasn't a momentary mistake or a lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate sequence of betrayals, lies, and theft. And Rebecca owed him nothing but fair consequences. Rebecca's phone vibrated with a message. It was from an unknown number. Hesitantly, she opened it. "Rebecca, it's Matthew. Please, can we talk? Just talk? No lawyers, no anger. Just the two of us. One last time. I deserve at least that." She showed the message to Jonathan, who frowned. "I don't recommend it. Anything you say could be misinterpreted or used against you later." "He won't get anything from me," Rebecca replied, "but perhaps I need this closure. One last conversation, on neutral ground, just to civilly conclude 7 years." Jonathan clearly didn't approve, but he nodded. "Your choice. Just be careful. Don't promise anything, don't sign anything, and preferably, record the conversation on your phone." Rebecca scheduled the meeting for the following day, at a discreet cafe in Santa Monica, away from the Beverly Hills social circles where they would both be recognized. She spent the rest of the day in meetings, speaking with the new potential clients Diane had scheduled, feeling her professional life expand in ways she had never imagined. Victoria Chen wanted Rebecca to manage the entire family portfolio, an account worth tens of millions. The Vanderbilts were ready to transfer the complete management of their pharmaceutical investments. Each meeting brought new opportunities, new challenges, new validation that her worth existed completely independent of Matthew. When she finally arrived home that night, exhausted but strangely energized, Rebecca found a box by the apartment door. Inside were some of Matthew's clothes, his toiletries, personal items. No note, no explanation. Just his belongings, hastily packed. He was already moving on, already accepting that this was real and final. Rebecca left the box in the entryway and went to make tea, sitting in the living room that now seemed larger, more open. Through the windows, Los Angeles glittered under the twilight. Millions of lives being lived in millions of apartments like hers. Her phone rang. It was Patricia Harrison. "Rebecca, dear, I was checking in on you. Richard and I were worried after last night." "I'm fine," Rebecca replied. and realized it was true. Better than I expected, actually. That's good. Listen, we're having an intimate dinner on Friday. Just a few close friends. Nothing formal, just good food and better company. We'd love to have you there. Rebecca thought for a moment. Part of her wanted to isolate herself, to process everything that had happened in solitude. But another part, the part that was beginning to emerge from the ruins of her marriage, recognized that isolation was not healing. Connections were. Community was. I'd love to come, she said. Thank you for thinking of me. After hanging up, Rebecca walked to the bedroom and opened the closet. Matthew's clothes had been removed, leaving only hers. The space felt strange, empty in a way that was both sad and liberating. She took out one of the dresses she had bought for herself years ago but never worn, a navy blue Valentino with lace details that Matthew had said was too bold for her. Rebecca held it against her body, watching her reflection in the mirror. Perhaps it was time to wear bold things, to be bold, to stop diminishing herself to fit the expectations of someone who had never truly valued her. The meeting with Matthew the next day was exactly what Rebecca both expected and dreaded. He had chosen a table at the back of the cafe, his face showing the signs of sleepless nights, deep circles under his eyes, unshaven. When she approached, he stood automatically, a remnant of politeness that seemed incongruous with everything he had done. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice hoarse. "I wasn't sure if you'd come." Rebecca sat down, keeping her purse in her lap, a physical barrier between them. "You said you wanted to talk. So talk." Matthew ordered coffee for both of them, though Rebecca didn't touch hers. He stirred his own cup nervously, searching for words that seemed unwilling to come. "I messed everything up," he finally said, echoing his words from the ball. "I know I've said that before, but I need you to understand, Rebecca. I truly messed everything up in a way I can't fix." "Yes, you did," she agreed calmly. "It wasn't about you being inadequate in any way. You realize that, right? It was about my own insecurities, my fragile ego, my inability to cope with your success while I struggled." Rebecca studied him, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. But all she saw was a genuinely broken man, finally facing the consequences of his choices. "Matthew, I appreciate you acknowledging that, but it doesn't change anything. You betrayed me. You stole from me. And worse, you twisted our story into a narrative where I was the villain. That's not something that can be fixed with apologies." He nodded, tears beginning to form. "I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance. I just wanted you to know that none of this was your fault. You were an incredible wife, an incredible partner, and I threw it all away for reasons I don't even fully understand myself." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of 7 years of shared history hanging between them like smoke. "The lawyers will prepare the papers," Rebecca finally said. "I hope we can resolve this civilly. You know, what you did was fraud, Matthew. I could prosecute,